You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 15th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio.
Could Syria return to the multipolar conflict from which it recently emerged? What does a switch of Prime Minister portend in Ukraine? And has the time come to fill in the private swimming pool? I'm Andrew Mueller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Mueller. My guests Tara Kangarlou and Olga Tokariuk will discuss today's big stories, and we'll meet the New York artist who shook hands with every single one of the city's garbage collectors. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I am joined today by Olga Tokariuk, Ukrainian journalist and Academy Associate at Chatham House, and by Tara Kangarlou, Global Affairs journalist for NBC, CNN and Al Jazeera America, adjunct professor at Georgetown University and author of The Heartbeat of Iran. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hello.
And Tara, to you first, not your first time on Monocle Radio, but your first time on the Daily. As regular listeners will be assuming, we have, yes, made you dress up in the in-house owl costume. That is just our regular hazing ritual for first-time guests. But the other hazing ritual we put through first-time guests through is to get them explain a bit about who they are and how they got here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Andrew. It's so wonderful to actually be in a studio, something that I rarely do for radio programs and often for television. But as you mentioned, I'm a global affairs journalist. I was born and raised in Iran, something that people don't really think of because of my American accent. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you guys a secret, which no longer will be a secret, but I used to have a little bit of a British accent because I had, the tutors in Iran that had that accent, mm-hmm. and I forcefully changed it in the U.S. so that I can, be cool. And so I worked with various mainstream news networks in the U.S., but left in 2017 to start my charity foundation, Art of Hope. That is one of the first American nonprofits that strictly focuses on mental health and trauma relief for war-torn refugees and IDPs, internally displaced people. And as you, Andrew, and Olga, you've all covered wars and conflicts. The impact of war is really catastrophic, and it exceeds generations, and that's something I've seen firsthand in Lebanon and Syria and so on and so forth. So I launched that in 2016. So that keeps me very busy these days. And you mentioned The Heartbeat of Iran. Mm-hmm. It is one of the only works of nonfiction that really humanizes the Iranian society. I oftentimes say Iran is a country of 90 million people, not 90 million nuclear heads. And there's a distinction there. So these days I write books and articles, and I teach the next generation of students and policymakers and lawyers at Georgetown.
Olga, welcome back to you. Listeners will be more familiar with your voice by now. We did talk last week to other guests about the latest Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome. You were actually at it.
Yes, and you talked to me once, Chris Chermak did. Mm-hmm. I was in Rome last week attending Ukraine Recovery Conference. As you know, it's like this 1 year event that happens every year, a major Ukraine-related event, where basically the topic of war is set aside, and what is the focus is on the future of Ukraine, on the reconstruction. Well, obviously, cannot completely brush off the fact that Russia still continues bombing and destroying Ukraine, and that reconstruction actually is happening every day, but there also needs to be some forward thinking, thinking how to cope exactly with what Tara mentioned, the trauma of war, the mental health impact, the education, impact on education. So I was there actually presenting my research for Chatham House on strategies for refugee and diaspora engagement, because currently there are millions of Ukrainians who live in abroad who have left because of the war, but there was also a sizable, huge Ukrainian diaspora even before. And, the Ukrainian government finally recognized that they need a proactive strategy to engage with diaspora. And in my research, I just offer some solutions how to do that. So I was very happy to be there, talk about my research and meet a lot of people whom I knew and whom I didn't know.
Well, we will be coming back to Ukraine shortly, but we start in Syria and with a clash which will hopefully be absorbed as a warning against the multipolar conflict into which Syria could once again descend, rather than being remembered as the resumption of exactly that. Israel has launched airstrikes against the Syrian military as the Syrian military attempted to enforce some sort of peace between Druze and Bedouin clans who had been squabbling over the city of Sueda in Syria's south, leaving perhaps 100 people dead. Syria's government has stated, possibly optimistically, that the fighting has not been sectarian in nature. Sueda has been largely controlled by the Druze, towards whom Israel affects protective instincts. Tara, first of all, Israel has set forth its rationale for getting involved in this. I quote, the deep covenant of blood with our Druze citizens in Israel and their historical and familial link to the Druze in Syria. Are we entirely buying that?
A great way to start the conversation and to put things in context. Israel's Druze community is in the Golan Heights, as you and the audience would most likely know. And they are around 100 to about 150,000 in population, right? And in Syria, they are a little bit over 3% of the entire population, which would make it about 700,000. So if you talk to locals in Syria, again, having come out of this 13-year civil war, they will right now tell you, and by the way, I've spoken to two Syrian sources in Zabadani who knew one of the boys who died in the recent clashes yesterday. They said, and many others will, that Israel has for long played this card. And right now, they are doing the same. They are trying to take advantage of the instability in Syria. They're trying to associate themselves with the Druze. And by the way, so many people within the Druze community in Syria don't want that either. They don't want to be played with for Israel's interest. So that's, my first response. And of course, the Syrian government is left with really a big choice and big question right now, which is how do we handle our relationship with Israel? And I think my answer to that would be the eyes would be to the West. I think Ahmed al-Shara is faced with a situation where, the United States and Europe will in some ways, I don't want to use the word dictate, but direct him to ways to deal with Israel and also Russia.
Well, on that thought, Olga, is it clear yet what Israel wants to see occur in Syria? Obviously, they were none too keen on President Bashar al-Assad, and they did, they contributed greatly to his removal by significantly defanging his proxy militia Hezbollah. But are they being perhaps a little bit hasty and not appearing to give Ahmad al-Shara much of a chance to hold it together?
Well, I think Israel's goal is to strengthen its position in the Middle East. And, that's another kind of arena where it can do it. So it sees a window of opportunity to establish itself and its presence more. And especially, seeing how Russian position has weakened recently. So there is big uncertainty over the future of Russian military bases in Syria. Negotiations have been going on for a while, but still there is no kind of definite answer whether those bases will be staying. So I think for Israel, it's just a window of opportunity to kind of strengthen its position.
I want to come back, Tara, to a couple of questions about the Druze. And to be clear, the Druze, like everybody else, are not a monolith of opinion. There are Druze who, since the Assad regime collapsed, have actually said we would rather be incorporated into Israel than remain part of Syria. There are Druze who do serve in the Israel Defense Forces. But as you correctly point out, there are also Druze who say we just like Israel and probably everybody else to leave us alone. But the number of Druze in Syria, the 700,000 people, it's not a small number of people. Has there ever been, or is there any agitation for, at the risk of wishing further complication on the region, any sort of Druze self-determination or Druze homeland?
That's a great question. And in some ways, I was going to add that to the category of Druze interests. And that has been the case. But, Andrew, for the longest time, if we look both in Syria and Lebanon, by the way, that also has a large population of Druze, their priority has always been their communal survival, political pragmatism and autonomy over their ideological alignments, right? And in the case of Lebanon, they have associated themselves with various political factions to, in some ways preserve their interests. And in Syria, again, during the war, of course, they had a hard time, but at the same time, they stayed true in maintaining their autonomy. And very similar to religious factions and minority religious groups across the Middle East, they have also been used by the authorities and by the ruling governments. So a lot of different interests within the Druze community. But I think right now, when you speak with the majority Syrians who are entering a new phase of Syria, whether or not they're completely hopeful in al-Shara's government, they are looking at this as an external force for instability rather than what this faction and this group of society wants.
Well, let's look at Ukraine now, which is still trying to figure out whether or not to be pleased that US President Donald Trump has given Russia a 50-day deadline to a ceasefire, or displeased that Trump has given Russia 50 more days to continue bombing Ukraine cities. Amid this dilemma, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced a reshuffle of his government, the headline of which is the standing down of Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal and his replacement by Yulia Sviridenko, presently Economy Minister. First of all, Olga, the likely, indeed near certain, new Prime Minister, who is she?
So she has been described as a doer by the Ukrainian media. I've just read her profile, by the Ukrainian public broadcaster. So she's been in the government since President Zelensky came to power since 2019. And initially she was the deputy minister of economy. Then she worked briefly in the presidential administration with Andriy Yermak, who is the chief of staff of Zelensky and who is described by some leading international outlets as the second person in Ukraine after president. And she is also described as someone really loyal both to Zelensky and Yermak. So she has a reputation of a very hardworking person who managed to, solve some really difficult tasks. So she, most recently, and the listeners would be aware of that, she was behind that deal, the minerals deal with the US, the second iteration of the deal that was much more in Ukraine's interest than the first version of the deal that was completely extortionate, and Ukraine was very unhappy about it. So it was Yulia Sviridenko actually who negotiated, who was a part of that negotiation team that managed to get that deal rewritten and to be as favorable for Ukraine as possible. And she was there also during the signature ceremony. So she was, on this kind of global screens back then. But the most kind of important feature is that is really her loyalty, both to Zelensky and his chief of staff. Because basically people who have their own opinions that are very divergent, they're very different. They're not staying in top positions for a long time. And Sviridenko is not like that. So she's very much on board with Zelensky. She's very much on board, with the kind of senior leadership. So she won't be somebody who would be creating problems. And as I said, she's also a very hardworking person. Second Yulia in Ukraine's history to be a prime minister after Tymoshenko, and in a way, complete opposite, because Tymoshenko was this, very flamboyant populist, and Yulia Sviridenko keeps a low profile, so she's not somebody who's very public, who likes to show off or do a lot of public appearances. In this sense, she's a bit similar to her predecessor, Denis Shmyhal, who was also a very kind of low profile politician, very kind of technocrat. So she's also described as a technocrat, as someone really competent, but also very loyal to the president.
Just a a quick follow-up on that, though. Shmihal is probably, it says here, going to become defence minister. In the current context, that's not really a demotion, is it? That's still quite an important job.
It is. It is an important job, but he will probably find himself in a much kind of harder, more difficult position than Prime Minister, being the Minister of Defense, because there will be a lot more attention in the country at war to a position of the Minister of Defense. Any mistake will be discussed and will be dissected, and there will be a lot of questions that he will have to answer. So I'm not sure he will be super comfortable, but I'm also not sure that he had a lot of choice. And this government reshuffle in general, it's not bringing any new faces into it. It's basically just replacing, promoting some deputy ministers to ministers and replacing some ministers with other ministers and also like merging, actually. Some ministries will be merged. So the Ministry of Economy that Sviridenko led will be merged with two other ministries, and there will be just one single person in charge of that. So it's not actually, kind of changing the face of the Ukrainian politics. And obviously, Ukraine didn't have elections since 2019 because of the martial law and all the constraints that like holding the elections at wartime under constant bombardment entails. So it won't mean kind of a change of a political class. The same faces will be there, and actually the president will remain in charge.
Tara, it's an unfair thing to drop on any guest, never mind somebody on the Daily for the first time, but we are going to have to try and assess the current state of US President Donald Trump's thinking. And on Ukraine, he's, I think, to use a charitable word, even more mercurial than he is on most other things. But could Ukraine, as of right now, and we won't hold you responsible for what might be going on if people are listening to this hours or days from now, can Ukraine be more confident of America's support than maybe it was 2 or 3 months ago?
Great question, and I would say I was having a conversation earlier with someone in Kharkiv. Actually, she's one of the teachers that works with my organization, Art of Hope, and to Olga's point, by the way, she said, speaking of creative solutions and new solutions, she said something very poignant. She said, coming up with solutions, creative ones, is our only chance, because we're not just talking about territory loss. We're talking about losing Ukraine as a state. And I think Olga can speak to this more, but that's the general sentiment. And to your question, Andrew, I don't think Ukrainians are confident in Trump's interests in Ukraine's well-being, but rather they look at Trump and the United States as a whole as their only hope, really. And I think as sad as that may be, because Donald Trump changes his mind all the time, and we've yet to see a straightforward foreign policy coming from Washington toward Ukraine, toward the Middle East, and quite frankly, anywhere else, except the India-Pakistan issue that he thinks he resolved. Waiting for him to come up with a solution has not been, something feasible and viable. And I think out of desperation, people take what's made available for them. Just today, there are talks of this new military deal that Donald Trump made with his NATO allies. That, we are going to give new arms to Ukraine, something that made President Zelensky quite happy. But Trump is making the argument that, no cost to our taxpayers in the U.S., but, NATO would foot the bill. So, is that making Ukrainian people happy and hopeful? I don't know. That I think Olga can speak to that better. But to your question, Andrew, I don't think this new administration, and quite frankly the one before, has shown any vigor in putting an end into the conflicts that we are seeing only escalate, whether that be in Gaza or in Ukraine.
Well, Olga, on exactly that, I will put that question to you, but with the rider that, again, as things stand as of this broadcast, Trump appears to be taking a certain amount of domestic political risk with this, because it's already started to come out. A lot of the proper MAGA headbangers are really unhappy about this. They just want out of Ukraine. They don't want anything to do with it at all. So it's not like there is no possible cost to him for doing it. That doesn't really answer the question of why he's doing it, because I suspect the answer to that question, as ever, is who knows. But the position surely does now look maybe a little bit better than it did when, for example, President Zelensky was being sort of wailed on in the Oval Office by Trump and Vice President Vance.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I would say that there is like a cautious optimism in Ukraine regarding this latest yesterday's Trump statement about especially sending Patriot missile defense systems to Ukraine. And, I'm very proud of, my friend from the BBC Ukrainian who asked Trump that question, to which he seemed to show a little bit of empathy and say, well, I'll consider it. And then, comes this announcement. So I texted her yesterday and I said, look, you procured Patriots for Ukraine. So one thing that you will remember when you're an old lady, what you've done in your life. So maybe you did that. So, of course, we don't know whether that had an impact or not. But that's definitely, I think, the most kind of welcoming piece of news that came from that press conference of Trump and NATO Secretary General Rutte yesterday. Another kind of, obviously, that kind of Trump delaying again any sanctions on Russia or secondary sanctions on countries that are buying Russian oil and help it to secure spare parts for its military. So he said again, 50 days, he'll give Putin 50 days. And of course, a lot of pundits in Ukraine said, well, that's exactly the time Russia needs to continue to press on with its summer offensive. Russia tries to capture all four regions that it recognized in its constitution as its territory, and it also tries to enter a new region, Dnipro region in Ukraine, that currently there are heavy fighting on the border of that region, and that would be really significant because it's one of the major logistical hubs. It's one of the largest regions of Ukraine. It's a very kind of large industrial base for the Ukrainian economy. So entering Dnipro region might really change the stakes on the battlefield. So kind of giving Trump giving Putin that time, telling him you have 50 days to proceed with this offensive, obviously has not been received very well in Ukraine. But the news about Patriot missile defense systems and some other types of weapons that the US is going to unlock, that was, of course.
Well, to Tianjin now, which is somewhat confusingly hosting the Foreign Ministers' Council of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which embraces Russia, China, India and most of Central Asia. As such, in the current context, the SCO serves as a sort of antipode to NATO. And among the possibly livelier bilateral scheduled are those bringing together the Foreign Minister of Iran with his counterparts from Russia and China, at which, it might be imagined, Abbas Araghchi will go as close as he dares to asking Sergei Lavrov and Wang Yi where they were when Iran was being clobbered by Israel and the United States. Tara, is it surprising to you that Russia or China did not want anything to do with that at all?
If you speak with folks domestically in Iran, they will say China has for long stayed out of whatever had to do with the nuclear deal and the nuclear discussions. They are one of the biggest buyers of Iran's oil, and they, along with Russia, by the way, have benefited quite a lot from the sanctions. So on the nuclear deal front, China sort of always stepped aside, right? Russia, though, and again, picking up on what we were just talking about earlier about a potential, what's Trump's thinking in dealing with Russia. In some ways, the conversations in Iran are presenting this scenario that is there a possibility of a Trump-Putin negotiation whereby Putin gets what he wants from Ukraine, but gives Iran to the United States, right? In some ways, forego their interests in Iran through the interest that they're going to get in Ukraine and let U.S. do, whatever it wants, with the Iran file. So that's the conversation that's going on. And again, Araghchi was in Russia recently, and the conversations in Iran, speaking with journalists and insiders, he came back very unhappy. He didn't get what he wanted, and he expressed Iran's concern about this lack of support during the 12-day war. But interestingly enough, that story was heavily retracted in the mainstream Iranian news. Let's not talk about this openly, and let's not give this image that Russia is no longer supporting us. But I think there's a huge anger among various political factions in Iran toward Russia. They, again, like I said earlier, they don't often count on Russia and its political or diplomatic weight when it comes to the nuclear deal or engagement with the West. But they are disappointed in Russia, and many don't expect much right now. And lastly, again, I want to reiterate that when you speak with Iranians in Iran, they would say Iran has always been a card, a negotiating card for Russia with the United States. And who knows, maybe, that's something we'll see unfold when it comes to dealing with Ukraine as well.
I mean, the Israeli airstrikes, Olga, against Iran began while the GlobeSec Forum in Prague was underway. And I was talking about this off the record to a senior European minister who said the Iranians, by which he meant, to be clear, the Iranian regime, are about to discover the hard way that nobody likes them. Should they have inferred from this that also applies to their nominal allies, Russia and China?
Well, clearly, the Iranian regime didn't get that sort of support that they expected from Russia. So Russia did not provide them with missile defense systems, to defend themselves against Israeli attacks or any other sorts of support, with the exception of some diplomatic, political rhetoric support. So,
you can phone that in, though. That's fairly cost-free.
Yeah, exactly. But Iran wasn't the only country that recently discovered the limits of Russia's support and also kind of that had its trust in Russia as a partner undermined. We've seen, Russia did not really step in to save the regime in Syria, except offering shelter and its soil, for the former dictator Bashar al-Assad. And the same happened with Armenia, in its war with Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh a couple of years ago. So I think it's kind of another demonstration to countries that see Russia as an ally, how unreliable Russia actually is, that, when they are in a critical situation, all the strategic partnership agreements, and Iran has just signed one with Russia a couple of months ago, they are not really working. They're not really valid. Russia is not the country that they can seriously rely upon, and Russia is not going to come to their practical defense. And another takeaway, I would say, from all this situation is that it is now becoming clear that Russia is not as interested in propping up the Iranian regime or in supporting Iran, because it doesn't need anymore that kind of military support that Iran was providing to it at the beginning of its full-scale war against Ukraine, when, as you know, Iranian Shahed drones were making a big difference. So now Russia is producing those drones mostly on its own territory, so it used Iranian technology, but the production lines are now located in Russia. Also, the ballistic missiles deal that they were discussing with Iran, it failed to come to fruition, and Russia is now getting actually most of its foreign-made ballistic missiles from North Korea, not from Iran. So Russia is kind of strengthening that cooperation in military sense with North Korea rather than Iran. And that's why it just doesn't see a lot of benefit in stretching its already kind of struggling economy to support Iran, especially if it doesn't bring also a lot of political dividend or any other sort of economic benefit.
A quick add-on to that would be the recent statement that came out of Moscow, which is, we're going to agree with a no uranium enrichment deal with Iran, which really is one of the red lines that Iran has. And no, we are going to enrich uranium. The question is to what degree? The fact that Russia now suddenly is saying, oh, any deal, we're okay with it. No enrichment. I find that, again, just echoing what we discussed and supporting this argument that was worth mentioning.
Well, to France now, and ill tidings for those who may recently have purchased a chateau with a swimming pool or those who had ambitions of installing one. Such oases are under increasing legal pressure as the hotter and more pool-populated regions of France are parched by droughts. Dozens of councils in Brittany have banned new pools bigger than 25 cubic metres, while others in Provence have outlawed them entirely, at least until 2028. Others have imposed restrictions on filling such pools as people already have with anything other than rainwater, and or insisting on covers to prevent evaporation. Olga, first of all, how concerned are you about the pool at your chateau?
I'm not sure I would want to have a pool even if I had a chateau. It's just it seems to be such a kind of big trouble to fill it in, to install all the cleaning systems, to kind of take care of it and just be able to enjoy it 3 months a year.
I grew up in Australia and, knew people who had swimming pools, and I've come to think of swimming pools a bit like I think of parties. They're great at other people's houses.
Exactly. I mean, when I'm on holiday, I love hotels with pools, and I would always pick one, not the least because my daughter loves the pool and she would prefer pool over sea any day. But yeah, I think, it is this decision. I can understand it. I think it's understandable because of the climate change and, because of all the kind of constraints that it entails and because of the inequality also it creates with access to resources. I don't think I have a lot of compassion towards the chateau owners who will be now faced with pool troubles.
Well, it would be, Tara, a niche, I think, political cohort, those ones seized with sympathy for the chateau owners. Do we suspect, though, this may be why the councils are doing this? Because it's a visible, decisive, easy win, and the people on the receiving end of it are going to struggle to scrape up much sympathy.
I don't know how French politics work, but in the U.S.,
I don't think the French know how French politics work.
In the U.S., I mean, if someone's donating to a political camp and political party, hey, you can get what you want. So I don't know. Those supporting this, maybe they're getting some political funding, but listen, I think it's mostly symbolic, right? Some people are happy with it because it supports the water-wise when it comes to drought and also climate-wise. I like numbers because I think it put things in perspective, and I think the water impact. Apparently, I was doing some research on this. It says pool bans alone shave off around 0.06% national use, okay? That's meaningful locally in drought zones, but really meaningless, right, nationally. But then the climate impact was quite interesting. I found out that while pools tally a small share of total emissions, combined across millions, in reducing use and improving efficiency can lower France's carbon footprint notably. And I think that was very interesting as a whole. So I personally have given up trying to find a pool living in London or New York or Washington, D.C. before that. So I don't know how I feel about it, but as a symbolic gesture, hey, if it can help certain communities and as a whole, I don't know, why not?
First, they came for the chateau owners, etc. Tara Kangarlou and Olga Tokariuk, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, nearly 50 years ago, the American artist Merrill Ukeles Lederman, in fact, set out to shake hands with every New York City sanitation worker. She also became an artist in residence at the city's sanitation department. For her, maintenance was not a detour from art, but the thing that fueled it. A new documentary film called Maintenance Artist tells her life story and shows how her decades-long career redefined what art could be. Monocle contributor Marisa Masria-Katz has the story.
The documentary film Maintenance Artist opens with the quintessential hazy scenes of a gritty 1970s New York City. The camera stops on a group of sanitation workers. They're dressed in green and gathered on a sidewalk. Opposite them is a woman with thick strawberry blonde hair. She introduces herself.
My name is Merrill Lederman Ukeles. I'm a maintenance artist. I feel that you hold up the whole city in your hands with your unending work. I think it's time for the public to hear what New York City feels like from the side of the people that keep it alive every single day.
Her speech was delivered at a time of crisis. New York City was still teetering on the financial edge, clawing its way back from the brink of bankruptcy. And then there was the trash, a flashpoint for the people picking it up and the residents throwing it out. A few minutes into the film, we see the artist speaking into a pair of mics taped together.
I desire to create a new kind of utterly public art, not in sealed-off special places for the few, but art injected right into the city's bloodstream of daily working life.
A rapid flurry of shots show us Merle walking around the city in her signature monochromatic outfits. She's shaking hands and talking with every sanitation worker she meets.
Excuse me, what is your name?
My name is Meryl Euclides.
Marilyn?
Meryl.
Meryl? Meryl,
I'm an artist.
You're an artist. Do you know what we do, though, on this job?
I'm trying to learn.
What is this going to do for us, if anything? I mean, I know there's a purpose behind it.
It's going to take me about 6 months to get around to all sanitation districts. And I'm just talking to whoever I can talk to. You know, somebody said to me it's going to take more than a handshake.
She called this work maintenance art.
I thought the whole conceptual and imaginative leap of maintenance art, first of all, was brilliant.
That's Toby Pearl-Freilich, the documentary's director. She first encountered Merle's work at the Queen's Museum.
She's been doing it over so many decades and in such a creative way. And I was very moved. I was very moved that she cared about a segment of society that we all depend on that we don't either notice or appreciate.
Merle's fascination with maintenance happened soon after she became a mother.
I loved that baby. I felt like I was rediscovering the world through her eyes. But I felt like I was two separate people in one body. I would meet people pushing my baby carriage, and they couldn't see me. They didn't see me as a human being.
She felt like she was slipping out of the avant-garde narrative she once felt a part of, and she got to thinking about her art heroes.
Jackson Pollock, who gave the gift of free bodily movement in the work. Marcel Duchamp gave me the gift of naming and renaming. And Mark Rothko, who gave me the ability to move from one dimension to another. But my heroes that I looked to didn't change diapers.
Then she had an epiphany.
If I'm the boss of my freedom, art is going to have to change.
Look, man, fantastic.
Art follows me. I don't have to shape up to Jackson, to Marcel, to Mark. I choose this life. That's my freedom.
If Marcel Duchamp can take a urinal and say, I name this art, then I say I name maintenance art.
For curator and director of the Alternative Art School, Nato Thompson, the decisions Merle made were nothing short of groundbreaking.
What Meryl Latimer Euclides did, which is absolutely essential and so germane to the times we are in, is she was interested in not only challenging the notion of the avant-garde, which is to say, rather than thinking of progress as a form of rupture or tearing away from the past, she thought of art an art of repair, of healing, of mending.
He tells me her art practice came out of the boldness of second-wave feminism.
It is a work that really saw the works of everywhere from cleaning a diaper to sweeping the floor to washing the dishes, these kind of domestic chores that she often talks about in her maintenance manifesto as exhaustingly boring and repetitive. She saw that kind of work of repairing, of healing, as a radical liberatory project and wanted to embrace that.
Over the course of the film, we see Merle work around the world. In one section, she's in Japan, coordinating a performance with snowplow workers on a field for a huge crowd. In another, she's working on a permanent artwork for what was once the largest landfill in the world, New York's Fresh Kills.
I was intrigued at the notion of making a film about a conceptual artist because people hate conceptual art.
Again, director Toby Pearl-Freilich. It's
like, they don't get it. It's not accessible. And the thing about Muriel's work is that it's accessible. It's not geared towards, they say art history is a conversation. Every artists are having conversations with what came before. But Muriel wasn't only having a conversation with what came before. She was having a conversation with everyone.
Muriel is now in her 80s, but as Nato Thompson explains, her influence on younger artists is still palpable.
It speaks to such urgencies now. It feels more relevant and prescient now. So, do I think that history is important? Absolutely. The fact that it speaks so much to the present moment shows just how ahead of the curve she was and is, and how important that work is.
For Monocle, this is Marissa Mazria-Katz.
And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Tara Kangarlou and Olga Tokariuk. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Henry King. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Mueller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.